Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War news update for the 1st of September 2023. Goodness me, time flies. The audio is work in progress. Evolution of my audio is something I am continually working on with a bit of a new setup, so it's not perfect yet. Give me some time and a boom that will be coming in the post sometime soon. So let's go to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. Gives us a good indication. All the caveats apply. I still haven't done that. So we have 470 470 personnel now. So that's slightly less than we've seen over the last couple of days. 23 tanks is a phenomenal number of tanks. Let's just focus on tanks for a little bit, because here's some footage of a T-90 being taken out by a loitering munition. This is something that is, a real threat to all sorts of different vehicles and personnel indeed. Drones, you do wonder if you go back to look at all these lists of stuff that's taken out, all these tanks, IFVs and whatnot, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I just think, when I get into my car and go to the shop, I don't think, there's a 15% chance of me being hit by something from the skies with some kind of munition, right? Just every time I imagine, people near the front line are ordered by their commanders to get into an IFV and go to a particular sector. All right, you've got to get there and go and support those troops. I'm like, oh yeah, brilliant. Wow, just getting in this vehicle and moving, there's like a 10% chance I'm going to be hit with a drone. Just, it must be a real psychological drain on people, or just even without being in vehicles, looking in the skies the whole time, listening for the sound of drones. Are they going to drop a grenade on me and sitting in this trench? I'm just so vulnerable all the time, no matter what I do. It just must be really psychologically demanding on these troops. Anyway, there's been an analysis here of the loss of T-tanks. T-family tanks from the Russians here. So 97% of these T-72Bs and 99% of T-80BVs have been lost. I mean, it's just insane. And then looking at it from the other direction, these are what are left. So you've got 4% of T-72B3s. You've got 6% of T-80BVs. Left 19% of T-80 BVMs. These are 2017 variants of the T-80, and they've got 19% of them left. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. Of the T-90s, they have 82% of them left, and that's because I don't think they're sending these to the front lines as much. Although we've just seen one T-90 taken out, and I've seen a few of them taken out over the last couple of days, actually. I think they're being more cautious with tanks in general. However, and they just don't have the tanks. I mean, look at the losses that they have had. But 23 losses yesterday. Is that accurate? I don't know. For example, is that T-90 definitely, taken out? Well, actually, yes, that one did not last. That's not reparable by the looks of it. But how accurate are these claims? Well, we've talked a lot about the Ukrainian numbers being far more accurate than Russian figures. I don't even look at the TASS and Russian MOD figures because they're so fanciful, they're so ridiculous that they've cried wolf, and I don't believe them. Anyway, 23 tanks is huge. 9 APVs is also significant. Consistently losing that many armoured personnel vehicles a day is a problem. 23 artillery systems. Again, a phenomenal tally for the Ukrainians there. The Russians must really be suffering in their artillery losses. And you do see a lot of footage coming out every day. It doesn't quite correlate, with 23. Like I've said many times before, the Ukrainians aren't going to be releasing every single bit of footage they have, and they're not going to have recorded every single loss of pieces of equipment. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 4 drones, 33 vehicles and fuel tanks is a phenomenal number. Again, this tells us the story that the Ukrainians are really hammering the artillery and are really hammering the Russian logistics. Now, we know that they've been doing that for some time, but this is just the 23 tanks is a big anomaly, and I wonder where that's from. Now, there's that footage the other day of that building that's hit with the Storm Shadow. Did that have like 8 tanks there? that's a large number of pieces of mechanized equipment in that one hit. One special piece of special equipment, obviously a bit of a drop there, but they over the course of the war they've only had 1.5 per day on average. So we're at day 555 of the war now. So Andrew Perpetua, the mapper that goes through all the video and photographic images that he sent and tots up that he comes across when he's trying to find out who is where for his mapping, and he tots them up on a spreadsheet daily. And this is really useful. He's a bit tongue-in-cheek at the end here, talking about 2 decoys lost by the Ukrainians, which are trees, because the Russians, he had some tweets about the Russians hitting some trees with some loitering munitions rather than the vehicle. So he's added them. So actually that takes you to less. I mean, it's at least a 2-to-1 advantage for the Ukrainians. The Russians losing at least twice as many pieces of kit as the Ukrainians with this analysis here. Although 2 of the Russians are planes back in Sukhov, the 2 of the IL-72s that we now know were definitely destroyed, and I'll come to that in a little while. Artillery, a few bits of artillery, but look, when you go back to 23 tanks being taken out and you've got this many, you've got a dozen tanks there on the list, then actually it makes these figures from the General Staff seem a little bit more realistic, don't they? Interestingly, though, with 33 odd vehicles and fuel tanks being lost, we are only seeing 2 here. So I wonder why that is. There's a real big difference between the evidence there and the claims. Helicopters, 2 helicopters lost for the Ukrainians. That's from 3 or 4 days ago when those 2 helicopters were lost around Bakhmut. How they were lost, we don't know. As he says, unknown cause, perhaps a Russian fighter jet. I don't know. It would be a Russian fighter jet, considering they're putting out like a criminal investigation into it, which would indicate that it's probably not a case of being taken down by the Russians, but some kind of, I don't know whether it was a crash, the 2 helicopters crashed into each other, whether there were some faults that led them to fall out the sky, so on and so forth. Anyway, that's just my tuppence on that. But as you can see, from there, wide variety of Russian stuff taken out of the tanks. You've got a couple of T-90s, as I was saying. I've seen probably both those bits of footage, and then, all these other T-tanks as well. Anyway, we'll go on. So Alexei Danilov here says the information in the Western media about the losses of the armed forces, well, he says a bit in a second, but P-Star11 says information in Western media about the losses of the armed forces in the war, so the Ukrainian losses, do not correspond to reality. The numbers of journalists are too exaggerated, Secretary of the National Security Council Alexei Danilov had said in an interview with Die Welt. Quote, our army is not big enough to talk about the loss of 70,000 soldiers. Those who cite such numbers obviously do not have accurate information about the situation in our country. Funnily enough, quoted right and left by OSINT accounts who usually like to see themselves as evidence driven. I always say, with regard to numbers, don't concentrate on. If someone says to me, well, how many Russian troops do you think have been lost, have been killed? My answer is invariably loads. More than the Russians are telling you, probably not as many as the Ukrainians are telling you, but a lot, and more than the Ukrainians. How many losses have the Ukrainians had? Quite a lot, but not as much as the Russians. I won't go people fixate on numbers. To me, it just sets yourself up to be wrong, right? I find these interesting and useful and reflective, these numbers of what's going on. I would be fairly certain to say that the Russians have lost a lot more troops than the Ukrainians. Exactly how many, I don't know. But I won't believe TASS and the Russian MOD. And here you might have the Ukrainian armed forces or Danilov here trying to cover up something. They have a really tight lid on Ukrainian losses. They don't talk about them for obvious kind of PR reasons. Are the Western analysts reading between the lines in incorrect ways? Quite possibly. Are they overcooking the Russian losses? Who knows? It's possible. All options are possible. Let me know what you guys think. But obviously, we must be aware of what we want to be true, and then the evidence of what is actually true. Okay. Coming on to a bit of footage that's doing the rounds. Here we have a Ukrainian drone. So the footage here, as far as I can work out, is from the Ukrainian drone, and it's looking back at a Mi-28N helicopter. Now, this drone got away unscathed, apparently. And it was hunted down by 2 Russian helicopters and a jet near Cape Tarkankut. So that's the northwestern edge of Crimea, where the Ukrainians have been doing special ops operations and where the S-400 surface-to-air missile battery was apparently taken out. We know at least some of the bits of the S-400 battery were destroyed. The Ukrainian claims are that the whole battery was destroyed along with all of the crew. Anyway, this footage is pretty insane, and this drone survived by all accounts. So here you've got the helicopter behind, who's, I'm sure, having a pop at it. As you can see, some smoke coming off, so it's shooting, almost certainly shooting its cannon at it. They're not taking it out with surface-to-air missiles, which I think is interesting. And the jet the other day that was firing at the boat in the Black Sea was firing with its cannon rather than with missiles. So I don't know what that tells you about stocks or about, what kind of weapons they have on board for what kind of activities they're doing. But this drone got away with not being taken out by 3 expensive pieces of kit. Anyway. Just thought I'd pass that on. It's doing the rounds. Right, moving on to distant strikes, and we're actually going to go back to talk about Pskov airport bombings. So Russia previously said that drones were responsible for causing explosions that damaged 4 transporter planes, and Ukraine has said it was with teams inside Russia, but Zelensky has tacitly admitted carrying out the Pskov bombings. So successful use of our long-range weapons, the target was hit 700 kilometers away. So this is the idea that in Pskov, possibly the planes might have been hit by these 700-kilometer cruise missiles, these adapted Neptunes, or was it drones within Russia, sent from within Russia? Or does the Russians say, was it drones sent from Estonia or Latvia? So after Zelensky announced successful use of missiles on a target 700 kilometers away, I asked, was it an attack on Pskov airfield? But Ukraine's Budanov says that was carried out from inside Russia. So again, what's going on? So something might well have been hit at 700 kilometers away. So Budanov, incidentally, satellite photos show 2 planes destroyed, not only damaged, so absolutely destroyed. And then there's been lots of talk about footage coming out. So head of the Ukrainian GUR, Major General Budanov, apparently spoke with the war zone, releasing a Ukrainian infrared drone picture of a burning Russian Il-76 at Pskov airbase. Now, this is interesting. So some people are talking about, well, if that's drone footage, then you've got a spotter drone going over, and then you've got some people saying, well, okay, the infrared image would mean that these likely bomblets dropped from a drone or drones under local man-in-the-loop control, unless the source of the image was acting as an observation drone to record the strike, which seems unlikely. This would fit Budanov's comments that this was a strike launched inside Russia, likely very near the base, and not one using long-range autonomous drones. So if it was a long-range drone, it's going to be a loitering munition that's going to blow itself up, not one that takes pictures of planes exploding. So the video from which the still we obtained was captured looks like the drone had dropped one of the bomblets. There's sort of lots of conversation about what's going on here. And then some people saying, well, actually, it's satellite imagery. So the moment of the previous attack on Pskov was captured by an infrared image from a satellite, which would then say, well, it's not a drone taking a picture of that. It's infrared satellite imagery. I'm not in a position to know. I don't have expertise here, but one of the Russian Il-76 destroyed at Pskov airbase by Ukrainian drones earlier this week. I mean, that is well and truly destroyed. So there's a couple that look like that. It'd be interesting to know exactly what was destroyed, how many were destroyed. Some of the rumors were up to 6 Il-76 and one Tu-22. In Pskov, Russian militants are shooting machine guns in the dark at incoming Ukrainian drones. So this is, this is as ineffective as you think it would be. This is last night. So again, claims about a further strike on Pskov. I don't know if they were firing at nothing or whether there were genuine aerial threats. Some people are saying actually, there's still quite a few airframes on the airfield, and we know the air defenses don't really work, so might as well keep going with them. There's a lot of talk as well. Ukraine the Latest had a segment on this yesterday, talking about the poor Russian air defenses. Like if this is their air defense working on a main airfield, then it really does show you that they don't have decent coverage. Now, Russia have got quite a challenge because they're a massive country. Not only do you have a huge front line within Ukraine and the occupied territories, so you've got 1,000 something kilometers to cover, to defend your troops and the territory there. But you have a massive country with manufacturing facilities that are really vital to the industrial military complex of Russia and therefore the war effort, littered all around a huge country. You've got major cities like St. Petersburg and Moscow, and you have to protect all of those potential targets with decent air defenses. No wonder you're going to have air bases just with the old, 70-year-old autocannons firing up in the air. Anyway, some interesting analysis to be had about that. And, we'll come on to this a little bit later, but it looks like the Russians are drawing like their air defense systems off places like Kuril Island, that's disputed between Russia and Japan. Well, if they're pulling them off there, it means they are desperate. They need air defense systems. They don't have them. And this is evident from, what we see around places like Sukhov, but also just from rational thought, really, and speculation. So Astra reports drones once again threatened Moscow. This is yesterday daytime. It's the third time today. So yesterday, drones have been spotted in the region around the capital. Video was taken in Krasnogorsk, where some of Russia's main air defenses are located. And here we have, further drones. I don't know what type of drone that is, whether it's one of those sort of beaver drones. Who knows? And then represented the Ukrainian Chief Director of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense, Andriy Yusov, said that the result of the night attack of the drones on the Moscow region, there was a fire at a factory where Russians produce electronics for missiles. He noted that the mayor of Moscow, Sobyanin, lied, claiming that their air defense seemed to have shot everything down. So the Russians will give you their account of events and the Ukrainians give theirs. The Ukrainians are claiming that they have successfully hit an electronics factory, and that won't be the first time that such a place, it could even be the same place, has been targeted, seemingly. Anyway, action in Russia again this morning. The Russians already say they shot down a drone in Belgorod, while this is CCTV of the moment an explosion was heard in Lyubertsy, near Moscow. So this is not Belgorod, but Moscow. And remember, you got the claim that they successfully shot down with air defense the drone. That's the beginning of the video, and it's just audio. You can't tell whether that's shot down, but it's a significant explosion. Who knows? Right. Explosions and sounds of gunfire reported in Feodosia again. This has been consistently hit over the last week. There are some significant targets at Feodosia. Tonight, one of two Kalibr cruise missiles was destroyed by the Air Force. So the Ukrainians shot down one of only two cruise missiles sent. I don't know why you would send two cruise missiles into occupied territories. However, with a 50% interception rate, I suppose that's not too bad, but it seems rather bizarre unless they're trying to do what the Ukrainians we know have done, which is smoke out the Ukrainian air defenses and then take advantage of that with a larger wave in the future. Second one hit a private enterprise in Vinnytsia region. Private cars were damaged, and the wounded are being assisted. Okay, now moving on to other bits and pieces here. Right, we have now. Wait with me a second. I haven't got my dictionary, my paper dictionary. It's in the other room, so let me just check on my other screen here. Dictionary for definition for liberty. The state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behaviour, or political views. Example, see Tim White's tweet. Interesting. Okay. A courtroom in Russia echoed to chants of shame on Russian justice and Natalia Ivanovna, hold on. It happened in Ulan-Ude when 61-year-old Natalia Filanova was jailed for 2 years, 10 months. Why? She must have done something horrible. For, quote, use of violence against 4 security officials at an anti-mobilization rally. 2 years and 10 months. She must have done some real damage to those 4 then. Is this liberty, the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behaviour or political views? Right. Correct me if I'm wrong. Russia doesn't have liberty, does it? So any Russian voices on my thread, pro-Kremlin voices that talk about restrictions in Ukraine to civilians' liberties and freedom of press and freedom of expression and freedom of anything, don't throw stones in glass houses. You live in a very delicate glass house and you have a really big rock in your hand. Don't do it. Right, Russia makes repeating official lies about its war against Ukraine mandatory in all schools, including Crimea, Donbass, and other occupied territories. This is the widely reported recently, actually, and a lot of you saying in the threads as well, Russia has removed questions about democracy and civil society. Oh, let's go back to liberty. Okay. From the unified state exams that it plans to impose as school leaving exams in both Russia and occupied parts of Ukraine in 2024. Instead, children will have to answer questions about Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and about annexed territory. The answers, at least in the history exam, must be strictly according to new textbooks, with teachers, students, and probably their parents facing serious consequences if they instead opt for the truth. Oh, look, someone still uses double spaces after a full stop or double periods. In the old typewriter times, you don't need to do that with the way that computers work. So just as a publisher myself and an editor, never do double spaces after a full stop in 2023. The greatest changes are to the history exam for school leavers, with this now based on new standard textbooks. This supposed textbook was rewritten most of the Soviet period and presents a particularly distorted picture of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, its invasion and annexation of Ukrainian territory. The new history exams will test students' knowledge that their textbooks claim are the reasons for and the course of what Russia calls its special military operation, known to the world as its war of aggression against Ukraine. Other topics where students will be expected to toe the propaganda line include the reasons and consequences of the collapse of the USSR, Russia's rebirth as a state power, and the purported reasons for what Moscow terms the reunification of Crimea with Russia, so on and so forth. I mean, lots more to get angry about in that article, that is for sure, and not just, punctuation and typography. Right, going on to something else. A kid in Crimea literally threw a bottle in the sea, and his message was found on a Ukrainian-controlled beach. It is a message of longing for the Ukrainian army to liberate Crimea. Hold on, we'll get there soon. This is one of those just funky little stories Google Translate here and a kid's writing, but it just really, really interesting insight here. We hope this letter will find Kane's hands. I'm not sure what that means. All our family is very writing to be released from the Russians. Crimea is Ukraine. We are looking forward to you. Me, my sister, Mala, Mama. So that's who wrote that, on who he's writing on behalf of, or she. Really sweet that. Just goes to show that there are people in Crimea, obviously, still defending Ukrainian interests and having sympathies for Ukraine. Shashank Joshi here, the Economist defense correspondent, says this, quote, "The significance of the advance is that it marks the first time Ukraine has penetrated the main Russian defensive line, i.e. the second line, an extensive system of minefields, trenches and anti-tank obstacles. Ukrainian forces are now working to expand the cracks." So this is coming from, I believe, the Wall Street Journal, who the mainstream media outlets are all over the shop on one day they're saying, oh, it's all terrible, it's a failed counteroffensive. On the next day they're going, oh, they've broken through, penetrated to the first line of defense and it's all going fine. So he continues, Ukrainian advances in recent days have led to cautious optimism among Western intelligence services that Ukraine can retake the occupied city of Tokmak, a logistical hub for Russia, according to senior Western intelligence officials. So now these senior officials are being quite boyish, are they? Oh, I don't know. Well, Phillips O'Brien talks about this in and I know this isn't particularly news, but it's kind of meta news. It's news about the news. If I may, I see a number of people saying now that the Ukrainians should be more receptive to criticism, that NATO can teach them, that they themselves have been critical of the counteroffensive, etc., etc. I think these comments miss the point. I've spoken to Ukrainians about this. While I'm in no way speaking for them, I will try to summarize what I believe they were telling me, and it matches what Podolyak, Danilov, Zaluzhny, and others have said in the past week. In other words, these kind of unofficial officials talking off the record to mainstream media sources criticizing the Ukrainian counteroffensive. This is what Phillips O'Brien is saying about this. One, it's not constructive advice aimed to help Ukraine if it's being fed anonymously to major newspapers as parts of stories about how the counteroffensive is not a success. Totally agree with that point. Constructive advice can be given in private by people the Ukrainians trust, and they are more than happy. Okay, 2, the criticisms that they need to fight more NATO-style combined arms warfare made no sense. They heard these criticisms, compared them to what they have experienced in the war, and thought they are wrong-headed. Again, these also seem to be made to get publicity and not help. 3, there is a fundamental difference between saying the counteroffensive is going slowly and saying it's failing. The failing idea is repeating a definite line of Vladimir Putin, which is aimed to undermine support for Ukraine. 4, it is also wrong. The Ukrainians don't believe the counteroffensive is failing. They believe that they have made the right choice. Time will tell, but so far I think they are right. They seem frustrated that this is not understood. This is just my summary of what I'm hearing, and I don't want to in any way to speak for Ukrainians. I will say that those who are implying they don't want to take constructive criticism offered in private and with good intentions are getting their position completely wrong, in my humble opinion. Mark Hartling, who's great, follow him on Twitter. He's a former commander of NATO forces in Europe, I think, or division commander. But he has another nuanced comment about this, saying that actually some people that say NATO have never fought a war like this, and therefore what are they doing advising Ukraine is wrong. He actually has a go at that idea. So after boneheaded comments by anonymous sources and commentary by mostly uninformed who have never seen combat, there's been increasing back and forth between how NATO shouldn't lecture Ukraine's army on anything re their offensive. So this, in my opinion, this is not helpful. So I'm going to just spend a little time on this, if you can indulge me. Conversations between senior military leaders is likely a lot different than what's reported. In my experiences, these exchanges in combat and in training are extremely helpful. I'm sure General Zaluzhny is thankful for the support. It might surprise most to hear that US commanders in combat and training are also provided retired generals as senior mentors, we call them greybeards, who contribute to the education of generals who are doing things for the first time. They are extremely helpful. As a new division commander in 2007, I was given orders to deploy 30,000 US soldiers and link up with 5 Iraqi army divisions, another 90,000 to conduct a variety of missions. My senior mentors were 2 retired 4-star. The info provided in prep, training, and combat was invaluable. By the way, most of their advice I took, some I didn't, but the mentoring shaped my decision making. While I had been a soldier for 30 years, commanding several times in battle, I had never been a division commander in combat with all the responsibilities of that higher command. When I hear NATO armies haven't done these kinds of operations and Zaluzhny has, I smile, because truthfully, yes, NATO has, and no, Zaluzhny hasn't. That isn't meant to be a contentious or an insult to Zaluzhny. NATO has conducted large-scale targeting, intel gathering, movement of forces, RSOI, operational logistics, and headquarters staff planning and wargaming in training exercises and in combat. While General Zaluzhny is extremely talented, he has never before coordinated large-scale offensive maneuver war with dozens of combat brigades. He is conducting kinetic operations, multiple deliberate attacks requiring intense combined arms breaches, while also synchronizing intel gathering, targeting, operational logistics for multi-domain operations of conventional special forces, territorials, rear area insurgents, while moving reserves to the right place, integrating newly mobilized and trained forces, overseeing humanitarian relief and movement of non-combatants out of operational areas, etc., etc., etc. While executing multiple large-scale deliberate attacks with breaches on different axes over a 400 to 600 kilometer front is tough enough, It's just one of his tasks. It's the other things that are a combat commander's real headaches. Commanders don't need nitpicking from cheap seats to 1,000-mile screwdriver, but he does need advice and mentoring. And frankly, and perhaps most importantly, when you're the person in charge, you need some friends who are like-minded in your profession of arms. Friends who know what you're going through, who you can throw ideas at, and who will give you a shot of whiskey. While I don't know Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, see this insightful article below. That's a Guardian article I referred to recently on Radakin that it was actually really good. I only referred to a little bit, but it's a really interesting article. I personally know General Chris Cavalli, who is the other guy up there. That's Cavalli there, Chris Cavalli. Those who know General Cavalli and his background agree he's a perfect person to command NATO and US European command right now. Some countered the early reports of a slow start of the Ukrainian arms forces offensive with, this is expected for this kind of operation. I was one of those. That offensive is now gaining momentum. Those now stoking Ukrainian armed forces shouldn't pay attention to NATO US advice may want to reconsider. So that's just an interesting corrective to some of those ideas that NATO have got nothing to be able to advise the Ukrainians about, since they haven't fought a war like this, yada, yada, yada. There is a lot of advice and help that they can give and are giving. And Zaluzhny, will welcome that because, imagine being that one guy, predominantly, on your own, responsible for the entire war effort. What broad shoulders you would have to have for that responsibility. And so it must be incredibly useful to have other people who have controlled that number of moving parts before and can tell you, how to do logistics, how to, or at least advise you or help you or be a sounding board. Yeah, really important. Right. Russia is, let's see if we can play a bit of Budanov. Everyone loves a bit of Budanov, surely.
Чи ми можемо з вами говорити, наскільки...
Not in English. So he says Russia several times prepared certain operations to assassinate the president of Ukraine. They prepared certain operations very seriously. I mean, we know that Budanov has been, there have been attempts on his life. Did he say 14 attempts on his life or something? And Zelensky I can't believe how much he gets out there and goes to places in different countries, but also in Ukraine, and meets people and does that so confidently. And I'd just be thinking around every corner, I'm sure there's a Russian going to kill me soon. Like, again, it goes back to that kind of psychology of when I go out today, there's a 15% chance someone's going to try and take my life. When I go out today, there's a 0% chance anyone's going to do that. Although, I had a go at Aussie Cossack the other day, and some people are publicly calling out for my GPS on Twitter. So I can be targeted. So I guess you've got to be careful. Okay, and finally, Russian hackers attacked the mobile devices of Ukrainian soldiers to learn about the military plans of the armed forces of Ukraine, says CNN, with reference to intelligence data of the Five Eyes Alliance. So this is obviously something that the Ukrainians need to be well aware of and have things in place in order to mitigate against. That will be something of a worry. Right, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you in part 2.